Hello, everyone. Welcome to class 3 of the California Native Plant Certified Landscaper program. Many thanks to our wonderful partners, U.S. Green Building Council, LADWP, California Native Plant Society, and of course, Theodore Payne Foundation. I am here at Theodore Payne in Sun Valley, formerly known as La Tuna, formerly known as Wikanga, the place of thorns, in ancestral land to the Wikan-Vitam, who are now known as the San Fernando Band of Mission Indians. We thank them for all of their traditional environmental knowledge, and we honor all of our neighbors in all directions, the Chumash, the Serrano, Kitanamuk, Luiseño, Kumeyaay, where you are, Claire, and of course the Tongva. Thank you all for being here. Claire, what's up?
Cool. Yeah, just we're getting into lesson 3. So today's all about soils. We will do a little homework review first. Many of you guys sent in your homework, but mostly, so the homework was just evaluating, different resources for maintenance guidance, and yeah, maybe if anyone wants to share what they found, if they found, did the resources agree? Did you find any maintenance guidance within the resources? Was it being followed? Was it not? Just kind of like maybe sharing what you found with whatever plant. If anyone wants to go ahead and share what they found. I also have the roster, so I can call in names if we want. But whoever feels like sharing, maybe, even if you didn't do the homework, just sharing, like maybe the resources that you have used in the past, even. Feel free to, you just got to unmute yourself, I think.
Yeah, I'll go.
Okay, Jill.
Oh, did I cut somebody off? No.
Go for it.
Okay. I did Sphaerocia ambigua, which is a desert mallow, my favorite plant, the little orange flowers. I love that plant. Mm-hmm. And we planted some at John Muir High School in February, and they're all blooming and fabulous. So I'm old enough to actually look at books. So I have this, which is like this super cool book that's divided into, like, every page is cut into 3s, and it's like small, medium, large. So you can see I've used it a bunch.
Nice.
And it does have maintenance in it, and water needs, and growth habit, and mature size. It does not have some of the things that the online resources gave to me. Las Pilatus, and I think Theodore Payne listed their plants that this would be good near. And so that was nice to find. I also used that book, which I think everybody has seen, or at least seen online, and has had forever. And since we just put the plants in, I guess I'm following the maintenance guide. They're blooming, they're alive. I mean, I can't really complain. We've only lost one to a gopher, so that's pretty good.
Right.
But I did find these helpful, and I could go down the rabbit hole of calscapes so easily. I would just go from one to another. So I just kind of made it compact, and that was that.
Yeah, I'm with you. I also can go down the rabbit hole of calscape, and I also like books. I just prefer them, the like physical thing, to look through. But yeah, when I guess it's nice to have all the research before, you, like you said, they're kind of newly planted. So knowing that is nice before they get too big. Once it's big and then you're reading the maintenance guides, it's like sometimes it's kind of late. But yeah, I believe, I'm trying to think, I've had a Sphaerocia that was, I think it had like, because the books I think are normally, it's like some kind of like 6 feet wide as a max, and we had one that like reached like 10 feet, and it was just absolutely bonkers. And yeah, just one of those examples of plants kind of doing what they want anyway, but always good to reference the books.
Yeah,
for sure.
I did notice the books, the widest that they said was 4 feet, and I too have seen these like in Anza Borrego much bigger than that, but I've never seen them in a yard like in a, you know, in a planted landscape that big.
Yeah, yeah, I saw exactly. I definitely saw one in a yard, very large. But I think too, also a lot of times you'll see the desert plants. Sometimes I think, I mean, this is just kind of my experience, but sometimes the desert plants I find can go outside of the ranges more than the maybe like a chaparral or something like that. And I think that has a lot to do with them being like uptaking a lot of water when it exists, because they are desert plants, not all of them, but
Yeah.
I've seen that kind of more often than not, I guess. Does anyone else want to share their homework? Anything they found, anything that was like way off, or maybe a resource they prefer? Like if you use Las Politas, do you like it? Oh, do you find it's more accurate than Theodore Payne's database or anything like that?
I'll share. Brandy
Okay.
Williams.
Okay.
Okay. So the bonbon sage. Now I have that planted in my front yard, and it is near a swell. So it is growing 6 feet, about 6 feet wide. And if you look at the resources, they're saying 2.5 or 2 to 3 feet high and wide. So it's not really the height, it's the width. And
Yeah.
Last class, you were saying, it does affect, like the environment. So it is growing near a swell. So I said, okay, it is north facing. So it does get sun. It's like on the edge. So it's getting mostly sun, but it has a little bit of shade because how my house, there's a high peak, the
Yeah.
roof, it's a high peak. So maybe that's what it is. And it's been growing for a little over 2 years now. I think I planted that about 2.5 years ago or so ago, or maybe just 2 years. But anyway, yes. So 6 feet is a far cry from 3 feet.
What did the resources say? Oh, you said it was 3 feet. I was going to ask you a question about the swale. Is it like where in the placement of the swale? Is it kind of bottom, mid, or on top?
Oh yeah. So my swale, oh gosh, I don't even remember the length. We installed it a while ago, but
Okay.
It is probably the root ball where we place the plant is maybe about, oh gosh, 4 or maybe about 6 feet away from the swell. So let's say like 5 feet or so from the swell.
Okay.
Maybe that. But
Yeah.
It's not that far away. But of course, the water, it does, the plant roots are taking advantage of that water,
Right.
that groundwater.
Yeah. I have done a couple of installs with swales also, and I don't feel like I have enough data to like say this confidently, but it has happened to me on a number of swale, like near the swales, that plants that maybe aren't in the swale, but yeah, nearby, get way wider than like actually that Sphaerolaceae that I was talking about was one of those, and get way bigger than they had said in the resources. And of course, like my brain wants to go to like, oh, it's because that, and maybe that is why. But I said, it happened, it's happened a couple of times, but I've never been really kind of confirmed on that. But it definitely, I mean, if I experience it, you experience it, I feel like there is something to the swale. Yeah. And definitely, I mean, and also obviously with the swales, like water is concentrating there, and plants obviously look for water. And, if that's, it does make a lot of sense. So like, I kind of tend to think now, especially when I'm installing swales after those experiences myself, kind of go bigger, like think bigger if I'm doing a design, and leave plenty of space. Cause it does seem like there's kind of an X factor there with the swales, because it's just so much extra water, that they have access to.
Yes.
Yeah. Did you when you were looking at the resources, did they mention like the sun or shade requirements, and how is it, since it's north facing, you said it's kind of in the shade, is it in a sun or shade requirement that it wants?
You know what? Well, for salvias, they need the sun. So, I mean, when I designed the plant, I knew, even though it was north facing, but how my property is, you are still getting sun like right at that edge near the edge. So it's just
Yeah.
not full shade. So, you know, it's getting enough sun. I think that's answering your question, but
Yeah, yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
sun,
Curious
getting
about
enough
the.
sun.
Sorry.
Oh no, yeah, it's getting enough sun and it's not full shade, but I know it has to have something to do with the swell. And the other thing is I just water it when I think about it. You know, it's established. So
Right.
you know, I just water it when I think about it. And no, and it's just overhead hand watering.
Okay, yeah, yeah, that's kind of that's kind of how I do it. It's just I'm like when it feels like about the time that I should, but
Yeah.
that is not what I will tell you guys in the irrigation class. But gotta say, I am lazier gardener than I teach about, I suppose. Anything else, Brandy? If you have anything else, or anyone else want to share what they kind of found?
I'm happy to hear if anyone else wants. So I'm in the master gardening class, and we recently had to do some things on trees and what they like. And we had to identify things in I was realizing as my assignment that actually my next door neighbor had planted a Xerisoma congestum, the shiny xylosoma. I'm a scientist, I can't even pronounce all this, but it's funny because I noticed it because I had all these little berries that were dropping into my yard. So you can see it. I don't know if you can see it. It's kind of behind me, but they planted this tree shrub. It's a natural East Asia tree, and it's supposed to require deep and frequent water, but it's on like their drip irrigation system, and it runs into my yard. And as you can see, it gets pretty much full sun, little shade. This is like the end of the day. It likes a hot, dry climate. It can tolerate wind, but it likes clay, well drained, dry, but it's very versatile and it grows very quickly. I think they planted these, you can see them. They're kind of intermingled with my grapevines, but they have grown. I think they grew within like less than a year to this height. They're supposed to go to 10 to 15 feet and 10 to 15 feet wide, but you can see they're clearly at this point close to the 15 feet tall. And the width is limited because they planted so many of them in like a dense row, but they grew very fast. They're always green, and they do have these lovely little flowers and these blackberries, which drop into my yard, which is why I noticed them when I was doing my my identification research. So
I didn't. So is it's native to East Asia? Did you say?
Yeah, that's what I mean. I looked it up. We looked it up as a group in several places.
Yeah.
I'm kind of rehashing my research from my master gardening class. Sorry, but
Yeah, that's okay.
it's interesting because this weekend in master gardening, we had a 15-minute breakout session to walk around our neighborhood and take pictures of trees and what people had done to butcher them in tree trimming and the lack of irrigation. And it was kind of fascinating to kind of have an understanding of what you're supposed to do and what we actually are doing. And just like looking at my own yard was kind of a big embarrassment. I think I've done just about everything wrong.
Yeah, well, that means you're like at the benefit of making the mistakes is then you learn from,
I hope.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of making mistakes in the garden. I feel like it's like you definitely learn when you make the mistake as opposed to like learning it from the book and you're being like, I don't know, that's just what they say. So, but yeah, so it's interesting because non-native species, tend to grow really quickly. I mean, we do have some fast growers with natives, but obviously the non-native species kind of can get up to height. They're bred to kind of get up to height and quickly, and if they have been botanized for a long time, they tend to get huge. And that's a good point you pointed out. Like, I think that happens obviously with any plants, not just, with all plants, natives and non-natives alike. When you plant them really close together, you can start to see that, that can really change maybe the way the shape that they grow in, if they're more vertical and upright or whatnot. So thank you for sharing. Let's get into, I suppose, lecture. So today's soils, this is like, I think the funnest class. Oh, forgot to point this out. This is basically what I just said. This was a homework review. Do the sources agree? We just talked about this. I forgot I had a slide for it. But yeah, getting into soils, totally my favorite class. At the end, you should be able to identify soil texture and its relationship to infiltration, identify soil-based problems faced by native plants, and then also you guys should be able to describe the proper soil management through the use of mulch and amendments. So yeah, just understanding soil is really vital to successful maintenance is, should be understood by the end of the class, I guess. So soils, what are they? Hold on, I gotta move some things around. So soil is composed of 4 components. It's this little pie chart on the left kind of explains or kind of shows that, but it is minerals from broken down rocks. So that yellow portion, minerals is the largest part. And then you have soil organic matter, which would be the living and decaying organic matter. It's all aged, kind of dead or alive, formerly alive things. So that's like twigs and leaf litter and organisms and also microbes and whatnot. That's all in the organic matter in that little sliver there. And then there's air and water. Those are the other components. So if you kind of think about it, air and water on the right-hand side are what occupy the pore space between the mineral matter and the organic matter. So I kind of think of that left-hand side as like your solid material, like your solid matter. And then on the right-hand side is the pore space. So it's either filled by air or water, right? And this is just a really generic percentage. I mean, generally speaking, it's kind of like this, obviously you could have different percentages based off of if you just watered or, compaction, or we're going to get into that. But essentially, yeah, think of the left-hand side as kind of solid matter and the right-hand side as pore space. So the space that fills between the minerals and organic matter. And managing for all 4 of these components is really what leads to like a healthy landscape, this applies to all landscapes, not just native plants. But, oops, my thing want to move? Oh, there we go. Soils, what some of the basic functions that they provide for plant growth. Soils provide a lot of things, but just in terms of kind of this class and plant growth, one of their functions is just anchoring the plants. It's just kind of like, a medium for holding the plants. Then there's also allowing for the microbial and fungal activity, and then facilitating moisture and nutrient movement, which is the last 2 are very intertwined, like allowing like microbial and fungal activity and movement of nutrients and moisture definitely have a relationship, I suppose. And it says we are going to be focusing mostly on this 3rd function, but like I said, it's very intertwined in the with the 2nd function there. And you kind of think of soils, they capture water and then store it or hold on to it in a certain sense, and then plants use that moisture to grow and move nutrients through their plant tissues. And within that moisture is where nutrients kind of exist as molecules. And then once they dissolve into liquid or moisture, that's how the plants uptake these nutrients. So nutrients kind of just exist in the soil as random little molecules, and they can dissolve into water, and the plants uptake and absorb that water that has nutrients in it, and that's how they kind of feed themselves, and that's how they move nutrients around. So moisture, just to be clear, is what moves nutrients through the soil, and without moisture, the plants cannot absorb those nutrients. I have another note here. Yeah, I think I just said that, but essentially, yeah, just understanding how water moves through the different kinds of soil is really critical to maintaining the like healthy garden. And we're going to talk a lot about infiltration because slow draining soils or slow infiltrating soils tend to be kind of a challenge with native plants. So we will be talking a lot about that today. Okay, so soil texture. Basically, soil texture is the kind of proportion of different mineral matters. So, the proportion of the different mineral matters within. So that little yellow sliver is made up of sand, silt, and clay. That is all the mineral matter. So essentially, soil texture is just a classification method that's based on this different proportions of sand, silt, and clay in your soil. And we're going to talk about, well, each of these particles, so sand, silt, and clay, have different sizes and shapes. So, and that affect its infiltration. So we'll talk, oops, how did I get there? Oh, there. Sand is the first one because, well, sand is the largest particle, and it's large, irregularly shaped, and on, and basically because it's so large, it has a lot of pore space, and water can kind of slip through those sand particles pretty quickly because there's such large gaps. And because of that, same reason, it also allows roots to grow and stretch out and develop pretty easily. So sand, as you can imagine, you know that it drains pretty quickly, probably, in a desert, you pour water on it and it kind of goes away pretty instantly. And that's one of the reasons is because of this feature of sand and the sand particles being large and having a lot of pore space between them. And so there's plenty of space for water to move and also roots. Also, to the feel, like to your hand, you guys know what sand feels like. It feels gritty. That particle is the one that feels like that. Silt is the next size down. So it's the kind of it's smaller than sand. It's kind of in the middle. It's smaller and more spherical in shape, like a kind of a rounder particle. And this is the kind of this is the particle that's like usually in sediment material that gets carried away by water runoff or flooding. You'll often see it in like a stream deposits or like lake beds or harbors. You'll see that kind of like, I don't know, it's just like I want to be like, it's just silt. But anyway, you'll see it in, like harbors, lake beds, any kind of floodplains, like the river deltas, not that we have many of those here, but that's silt. We typically don't see a lot of silt in our soils here because of that reason, because we don't have a lot of waterways. But if you are maybe near one of those kind of waterways, or you get runoff or whatever near a place, you might see that on your soil. But what was I going to say? Oh, silt is easily compacted. It like clay, which we'll get to, but it can retain a pretty large amount of water, but also releases it pretty easily. So it's kind of this in-between phase. And when you feel it, it kind of feels like baby powder or like flour, that like silky kind of feeling. Clay is now the smallest particle of the three, and it really is kind of like this flat plate-like shape, and they kind of like lay on top of each other in layers. And obviously, they lay on top of each other and they kind of fit together pretty densely. And because of that, there's very little pore space between the particles, and water kind of, gets into it and sticks pretty well. So that's why clay can hold water really well. It's got smaller particles, pore space between the particles, because the shape and the size of the particles. You guys know the kind of clay is pretty sticky when it's wet. That's kind of this feature part of the clay, and also can be very easily compacted if you're, tilling the soil maybe when it's wet or something like that. And holds on to water, so it holds on to water more readily than even silt, and doesn't really release it so easily, so it holds on to water even more so than silt. Just as a kind of like size reference, here is I should make a note. This is just size comparison here, this little graphic. It is not the shapes. Like I said, sand is irregularly shaped. It's not a nice perfect circle. Silt is kind of more spherical, but the clay would be these kind of flat rectangular plate-like things. But just so you know, see, the sand would be the yellow one. It's a pretty large. Silt is the medium blue one, and then clay would be that small, less than 0.002 millimeters. So something like sand, you can see with the naked eye. You've seen a sand particle, you can touch it, feel it, look at it. Silt, you need probably a microscope to see it, and then clay, you need like an electron microscope to see it, like an individual particle. You guys actually have a good picture, I think, from an electron microscope in your student handout with this outline. With this class, there's a handout called Native Plants for Heavy Soils. And it has a picture there of the clay under the microscope, but also it has a list of over 40 native plants that do really well in clay soils. So super great resource, and want to have that handy whenever you may need it. anyway, back to this particle size and shape is really going to determine how the soil behaves and how water moves through it. And this has a lot to do with the shape and size, obviously. But and that's because, like I said, think of it as like the water, it gets more easily stuck in clay because it's more densely packed together. I will talk about it again. We're going to talk about this quite a bit. So don't worry if it doesn't make sense. The soil texture triangle, this is like, if you're like, what kind of texture do I have? There are lots of different tests to figure it out. This texture triangle is helpful if you know the relative percentages of sand, silt, and clay that you have, which you could potentially have from like a lab, or you can also do like a jar settling test. You can Google that. We're not going to do that, but essentially get a jar, shake it up. I have one I did, but essentially the larger particles settle out. Can you see it? Oh, I mean, I'll show it later, but the larger particles settle out first. So the sand settles first, and then the silt, and then the clay. Typically, you kind of can only really see the sand and clay because we don't have high levels of silt in our soil. But either way, you can then figure out your which class you fall into using this triangle. You can see the clays on the left, silt on the right, and then sand on the bottom. What was I going to say about this? Oh, yeah. So loam, you might hear people be like, oh, it's a nice loam or a loamy soil. This is typically talked about like in the kind of agricultural world, or even vegetable garden. I want this loamy soil. And even like an ornamental garden, like a traditional kind of turf garden with non-native ornamental plants. And the reason they want these loams is because loams hold on to like nitrogen, like high nitrogen feeding situations, like vegetable gardens and stuff. They need high levels of nitrogen, and loam can hold on to nutrients well. It can hold on to water. It can also shed water. It's kind of that like Goldilocks, and that's why people really want loamy soils in those situations. However, with native plants, we are not restricted to loamy soils. We don't need to have that. We don't need like the perfect loam soil, because native plants are adapted to clay soils and sand soil. We have many of the Southern California soils are clayey or sandy. So they're already adapted to those soils and those nutrient levels. We don't have to like prep the soil in some way to try to get it to be more loamy, if that makes sense. So that is really nice. That means you have options. But one thing I wanted to say that I think this chart helps showcase, I guess, is that clay in your soil, because, oh wait, I'm gonna go back a little bit, which is, it's really, really rare to have 100% of any type of soil, like 100% of one particle. So it's very rare to have like 100% sand or 100% silt or 100% clay. Almost always you have some kind of matrix of the mix of the three. And that's why it's the relative percentages here. Anyway, back to what I'm saying, which is clay has a really dominant characteristic in your soil. So you can kind of see that if you look at if you had a 60% clay soil, even if it was 40% silt or whatever, 30% silt and what's the other part of the math is 30% sand. If you had that, oh no, sorry, that would be 20%. Anyway, guys, I'm sorry, can't do math on the spot. Anyway, so if you had a 60% clay or a 90% clay soil, it's all going to be classified as clay. It's all going to act like clay. It's all going to act the same, and that it's all classified as the same type of soil. So it just kind of shows that like a 60% clay soil and a 90% clay soil, they're all clay. That's not the same, for example, for sand. If you had a 60% sand versus a 90% sand, 90% sand's always in the sandy kind of triangle, but 60% you could potentially have a sandy loam, sandy clay. So just kind of shows you that the more clay you have, the more dominant characteristic or dominant the more it kind of plays into how your soil behaves, how water infiltrates, how you want to treat your soil, because clays are readily or more easily compacted, and whereas sands are a little less, they're more difficult to compact though you can. But clay soils, it kind of gives you a clue as to how to treat it, how it's going to behave, how the water is going to move through it. So just kind of a reminder there. And clay, what else? Oh yeah, so also the more clay you have, if you have some 60% clay soil, this is just, again, goes back to, we have plants for this. You have a whole list of plants that can thrive in clay soil. And this goes back to that planting the right plant for the right place, so if you have clay soils, really start thinking about clay thriving plants. And if you have sandy soil, same thing, if you have thinking about plants that are appropriate for that type of soil. Last caveat there is you cannot change the texture of your soil. That's really important to know. You're not going to be able to like get a dump truck load full of sand and mix it to change your soil type. There's just no way to really put in enough sand or whatever you want to add to your soil. There's no way to actually change it. Even if it would be so cost prohibitive. And also just to mix it would be you just destroy your soil structure in the process. So don't think about trying to change your soil as much as trying to work with what you have. That's like life lesson, right? Okay, so this this is going to be actually just a video since we aren't really in person, and this would be a lot easier in person, but you are going to do this for your homework, so make sure you get what's going on here. I'm just going to kind of explain this verbally, but then there's a video to kind of show you this, even all these words look like in person. I really recommend, so this is a soil test by feel. So like I was saying, there's several different kind of ways to determine what kind of soil texture you have. One of them is this soil test by feel, which has the ribbon test as part of it. You guys also in your outline for this class have a flow chart. It looks like this. It's like, standard flow chart. That is what you want to use. That's the ribbon test. It's not, anyway. So that's the ribbon test. That's the soil texture by feel. That's what you're going to use for your homework. And essentially it's kind of like you get a handful of soil, you add some water, you really massage out all the knead it and break it up, any lumps, adding water to you until you get to kind of like a cookie dough kind of texture. And then you're going to squeeze the soil and open your hand to see if it keeps that shape that you made, that ball you made when you squeezed your hand. That's called a cast. And if the cast immediately falls apart, like it doesn't hold its shape, then that's indicating a sand texture. And you can see, if you want to look at if you have it up or available, your flow chart, that's that first option there. It basically walks you through it. Like, does your soil remain in a ball when squeezed? Yes, no, is it too dry? Is it not? If it doesn't, it's sand. So it just walks you through figuring out what kind you have. So moving through it, if it remains in the cast shape, but then breaks apart, it's a loamy sand. If it just deforms around the tip of your finger, your poking finger, but it could be a sandy loam unless it forms a ribbon. And then that's when you actually kind of do the ribbon part of the ribbon test. But don't just do the ribbon part. Make sure to do the cast part first. That's all part of it. And then you'll, but the ribbon part is when you're kind of squeezing it through your thumb and forefinger, trying to make a thin strip. And if it makes a short ribbon that's like less than an inch, it's probably a loam. If it is more than an inch, it's usually some kind of clay loam. And then if it's a very long strip, it's usually some kind of clay. Oops. I just wanted to also a little caveat. You also have this graphic that is like 3 hands here that's in your outline. I have a little bit of an issue. Well, I know that some folks used it last class and kind of confused that it might, it's what it does is it kind of indicates that if you do the ribbon and it forms a short one, then it's silt, but that isn't the case. It's kind of, it's a little misleading, I think. So use all of the little graphics you have and all your notes and things to kind of cross-reference and make sure you're doing I would just really rely more on the flow chart. But that being said, don't just use that little black graphic with the hands, because it might lead you to believe that you have a full silt soil, which is very unlikely, like I was saying. So anyway, I will do this video next. You guys, this woman's Australian, so cool accent coming up, heads up. I will do.
Soil texture is basically the composition of the soil in relation to sand, silt and clay, with sand being the coarsest fraction and clay being the finest. Now, it's important to understand your soil texture as it has some major implications on soil management. It's important because it influences water holding capacity, water infiltration, nutrient retention and erodibility of the soil. Soil texturing is an easy thing to do. There are two main ways that you can determine your soil texture. The first is very simple. It's a soil test and sent away to the lab for a particle size analysis. The second, also quite easy, is to do it yourself in the field. It uses your hands and some soil, a very easy thing to do. Firstly, we take our soil that we've sampled, you take it in your hands and you give it a nice little push together with your fingers just to break up the smaller pieces. Anything that's more than about 2 millimeters in size, rocks or coarse fractions like that, should be removed before you start texturing your soil. So we break it up so we've got a nice palmful of soil and we can begin our soil texturing process. If the soil's dry, then I would suggest adding just a little bit of moisture just to help it all come together. And then using your hands, push all the soil together, work it between your hands until it forms a nice moist ball. You don't want it too wet, but you need it to come together nicely. We may need to work it for 1 to 2 minutes, and we really want to feel in this 1 to 2 minutes what's present in our soil. So if you've got coarse sand, you can really feel the coarse sand within the soil. And while you're spending the 1 to 2 minutes, why don't you think about what you can feel? I often close my eyes to help the process. For example, if you've got sand, especially coarse sand, you can really see it and feel it in the soil. If it's a fine sand, it might be slightly more difficult, but holding it to your ear, you can often hear the fine sand in there grinding together. Now, a clay is very much like plasticine. It forms a nice ball that holds together, and it's often quite sticky. And if you've got a lot of silt in your soil, like this one appears to have, it stains your hands quite a lot. It feels silky to the hands, so it's important to take that time to really feel what's in your soil. So when you've worked it together for a while, the next process is to form a ribbon. So we push it between our forefinger and our thumb. And in pushing that, we're creating what we call a ribbon. And we do this a few times so that we get an average across the ball. And I'll probably get about 3 out of this one. We push that through, and it looks like in the surface soil, we're getting little ribbons of about 1 to 2, maybe 3 centimeters maximum. Then you can use a ribboning chart to assess what type of soil type you have. So you should be able to now determine what the water holding capacity is likely to be in your soil, the best plants that are suited for your soil, and any potential issues that you may have going forward in your production system.
Okay, I see that it was kind of choppy for some of you guys. Let me just put that link in the, oops. I think I have it here in the notes. Yes. That's it, yes. So I'm gonna put this is the video in case you guys want to watch it separately. Okay, back to present mode. Hopefully they don't make me watch it again. There we go. Okay, so I like that she mentions using all your senses, you know, your ears and really feeling with your, you know, your fingers and whatnot. Just, but yeah, that's going to be your ribbon test. You know, based off of what she said, if you kind of look at your flow chart, they probably have that soil that she was dealing with is probably some kind of, she said it kind of felt really smooth. So I would almost guess that would be a silty clay loam, but you know, I didn't actually feel it myself, but it is in the kind of loam category, it sounds like, you know, and then you can see there's 3 options there on your flow chart to what she was saying. And thank you, Brenda, for translating plasticine. You know, I was like, yeah, what plasticine? Anyway, back to, so infiltration again. So infiltration is the rate at which water moves through the soil, and it's very much tied to soil texture, which I'm gonna keep harping on. But essentially here you have the soil texture, like here would be an example on the left of a large pore space or a sandier soil with these larger particles, and you can see that darker gray in between is a lot, that's the pore space. And so there's a lot of space there for water to move through and go downward, right? Or even roots. But you could, that's kind of this concept with the kind of sandier, larger particled soils. And on the left, it's trying to mimic more of like a clay soil, and you can see they're more densely packed, and that's a smaller little pore space between. My one kind of caveat with this photo or this graphic is that the clay soil particles actually don't lay like that. You can see it in that photo I was saying that's in your in the list of the native plants for heavy soils. It actually lays like horizontally. It doesn't lay like that. It kind of gives the wrong impression, but I'm kind of showing in my video here with these like catalogs, but it kind of lays just like haphazardly, you know, layering on top of each other. And so if you think if water goes down, it kind of moves laterally, and, you know, it kind of works its way into the spaces. So it's not like they're not like this, they're not vertical. That's the only thing I wanted to say about that graphic that I think is a little misleading. So it's more like the plates are laying this way and the water moves through and, you know, fills the spaces. And because of that, you can tell like it will be kind of slower for water to travel and work its way into each of those pore spaces. If each of these catalogs or notebooks were a particle of clay, it takes more time. So that's why clay soils tend to infiltrate a bit slower. And also, I need this. Also, that's why clay soils, the water moves a bit laterally when you're watering it. So this is a little graphic for the larger pore space or like a sandier soil. It's, like I said, it's easier for it to move vertically downward and more quickly. So you can see this time thing on the left shows in 24 hours, it's already can move 72 inches down, or even just in 15 minutes, it's gonna soak, which makes sense. You know, the sandier soils, more pore space for it to move through. And then on the right-hand side would be the clayer soils. And like I said, with like they actually kind of moves laterally. So it's got this capillary action in addition to obviously gravity, but because it moves kind of laterally, it's moving pretty slowly downward. And you can see the right-hand side of the graphic, there's the, you know, it takes 4 hours for it to reach 24 inches. And even so, it's definitely going outward much more than the sandy soil. So this is something I would definitely keep in mind for watering, you know, for irrigation. It takes longer, it not only takes longer for the water to move downward, but also knowing that it moves laterally as well when you're irrigating. So kind of times, you know, if you're doing a bunch of if you're doing like a long irrigation run, you know, it just doesn't work on a clay soil. You're going to have a lot more runoff because it can't actually infiltrate that quickly. Let me see if I have, okay. Measuring, this is kind of the second part of your homework, but so you can also measure the infiltration with a quick, easy percolation test or a perk test. And, you know, essentially you're just going to dig a hole that's like, that says 12 inches deep and 12 inches wide, but, you know, it can just be the 1 gallon pots that you buy, you know, that you get a plant in. That's fine. Just make sure it's straight sided, and then fill the hole with water. Oh, I also should say, do this, it says like do infiltration for different planting areas. Do it where you want to plant the plants. You know, if you want to measure the infiltration for an area, do it where the plants are. Don't just do it in the middle of like, you know, your driveway or wherever, you know, well, I guess if you have soil in your driveway like I do. But definitely do it in a planting area because that's what you want to know how it's infiltrating, how quickly. Anyway, back to it, fill the hole with water, and then you want it to infiltrate fully, like drain completely out. And you're going to be checking it kind of, you know, every 30 minutes or something. And essentially a fast draining soil, which is typically a sandy soil, is going to be less than 30 minutes. And this is fully drained out. Like I said, a lot of times you'll see that it drains really quickly for a couple inches, then all of a sudden slows down. That doesn't indicate that. You still have to wait until it's fully drained out, and that will indicate what kind of soil or infiltration rate you have. So fast would be less than 30 minutes, medium would be 30 minutes to an hour, and then slow would be more than an hour. So if it infiltrated quick in the beginning and then slowed down, then I would suspect you have some clay in there, even if it was fast in the beginning. Let's see. Oh yeah, so with rapid infiltration, let me see if there's, yeah, rapid infiltration. This is kind of also, you can think about, plant choice again, same thing, but rooting is always going to be going vertically downward because all the water is there. That's where the water goes. Roots, it's easy for them to root in these open pore space sandier soils. Medium, loamy soil, just make sure considering, is the soil newly excavated or is it fill material? If it is, it's going to settle to whatever its natural state will be. So it will settle further, and you might need to take an infiltration test then. But it never hurts to plant deep-rooted species, honestly. But even in this case, if it's going to settle, or even if it's a medium loam soil, make sure not to compact it. I mean, honestly, don't compact any of them. But clay soil, what do I have here? Oh, yes, making sure to note route surface drainage. So if you have gutters that are going, you maybe don't want your swale to be in this area, or your rain garden, like the basin, if you're doing like a basin for catching the rainwater, maybe not the best spot if it's a very high clay soil. And or just maybe not in a place where it's going to get saturated. Maybe there's a neighbor sprinkler or something like that. Just keeping all that in mind. Let's see. Yeah, so that will be your homework. The two, you'll do the infiltration test and the ribbon test, or the kind of texture by feel. They're the same thing. So maintenance implications for regarding these kind of things. Again, this is kind of beating the dead horse here, but really want to make sure that it's clear that soil texture impacts that, or that you understand that soil texture impacts infiltration. And this is that pie chart again, and you have your mineral matter here on the left with organic matter. So here's the sandy soil, and in the middle is the clay. They have the same mineral matter, like content amount, but with the sandy soil, you have more pore space. So you're actually gonna have more air between and less water, right? Because the water, it's not gonna hold on to that water, it's gonna move through. So typically you'll have more air space in the pore space, if that makes sense. And then the clay soil, like I said, because there's smaller pore space, more densely packed together, the water, and it holds on to water, it's gonna have a higher percentage of water than air. And that should make sense with the infiltration, right? Like it has less air space, so clay soil will infiltrate more slowly. And the reason, I think I said this earlier, but slow infiltration, the reason that I'm harping on it is that it can be one of the biggest contributors to like plant death, along with / same overwatering. So not having the right plant in the right soil can really be problematic, So, and the last one here, compacted soil. So here is when you have the mineral matter. There's actually more mineral matter because it's been compacted and smashed down so much that you're actually jamming a bunch more, sandstone, clay, mineral matter into the space. And you basically, essentially, you've destroyed the soil structure, which soil structure is essentially kind of like the soil particles. They form kind of aggregates of different various shapes and sizes, and that's kind of like the crumb of the soil. And you want like a nice diverse crumb of soil. And anyway, back to this compacted soil. When you've destroyed the soil structure and everything's just like jam-packed together, you have a lot more mineral matter and very little airspace. And so that means that these soils that are compacted, that's why you see them being kind of acting hydrophobic, which means they don't like let the water infiltrate, they don't absorb water well. And that's literally because there's so much solid material jam-packed together, it can't make its way through. So yeah, that's just kind of a comparison there. The let's see. I think we'll talk about this point I'm about to make, but in another slide. But water holding capacity, this is just a term. It's also called field capacity. It's the amount of water that the soil can hold. We kind of talked about this. But the amount of water, clay soils have a higher water holding capacity. This should make sense. The denser kind of the nature of it, it can hold on to water. And you guys, like, again, the plasticine of the Play-Doh holds on to the water much better than the sandy soil. That's kind of can be reiterated by your own experience, but also knowing the size and shape of the particles. So sandy soils have a lower water holding capacity. And this is super important when you're irrigating. We'll talk about it in the irrigation class, but again, and also where you're planting your plants. So again, knowing plants that are down with a little being in a moisture condition are what you're going to want to plant in those higher water holding capacity soils. Let me see. Oh, also knowing that for like a rain event, you know, if you have a rain event and you have clay soils, you know, if you had a good rain, the clay soil is going to hold on to that longer than the sandy soils. So you might be irrigating more soon after the rain in a sandy soil than a clay soil. Yeah, anyway, I might be getting a little too much into irrigation, but next is nutrient holding capacity, kind of similar to water holding capacity because nutrients are typically dissolved in the water. So they can think, you know, the clay soil again is going to be able to hold onto nutrients a bit better because there is the smaller pore space. Also, it's because it's negatively charged, the clay particles, but that's a whole different, you could just take a whole, you know, soil class on its own. But it is typically because of that, because it's like that plate-like structure of the clay particle, though they're tiny, they have large surface areas because if you go back to geometry, it's like the kind of rectangular thing has more surface area. So there's more surface area for those nutrients to actually kind of stick onto than in a clay soil than there is in a sandy soil. Oh, and the California, yeah, I think I have a note about, yeah, this is also kind of why you want to be careful about adding synthetic kind of fertilizers that have, because clay, for example, has a really high nutrient holding capacity. So it might take on quite a bit of those nutrients. And with native plants, they don't need a lot of extra nutrients. They thrive on the clay soils as they are, which are, you know, relatively depleted compared to like maybe a vegetable garden or something. So they're totally adapted to that. And you don't really need to, I guess you want to just be careful when you're fertilizing, especially in the clay soils. I can see the chat here. It says compacted soils caused by human processes, construction, etc. Yes, and also if you could be tilling your soil regularly. Some people, you know, any kind of human action intervention, yeah, can cause compaction. I'm trying to think if it's typically our fault, I guess. I can't really think of an example, but if somebody else thinks of an example where maybe natural compaction. Okay, I think that's, okay, yeah, and this is just kind of a summary of the soil qualities. And this should be all, like, you get it, we've talked about all these things, but the sandy soil here on the left is gonna have that rapid infiltration rate, like I said, because of the large pore space, moves through it quickly, which means it's gonna have a low water holding capacity, can't really hold on to water, it's draining through quickly. Also low nutrient holding, draining through quickly. And then the aeration is going to be very good because there's so much space between the pores, there's a lot of air, you know, so that's kind of the features of your sandy soil. On the right-hand side, the clay soils are going to kind of be the opposite of that. So they'll be slower infiltrating because of the more densely packed pore space and smaller pore space. And then, but that also means they kind of hold on to water more. Their water holding capacity is higher, so they hold on to water better, and thus also their nutrient holding capacity holds on to nutrients a bit more. And then it says moderate to poor for aeration, and that's because clay soils don't have to have poor aeration. Not all clay soils are compacted or bad. I mean, clay soils can be well tended to and have moderate aeration. So maybe you have a lot of good like soil organic matter, or you have a like good soil structure in your clay, and that would be a case where you might have moderate aeration. So you have some air pockets, or sorry, a little more pore space, but it's never going to be as much as a sandy soil. And then clearly loamy soils is like, you know, middle of the road on all of those features. Just as a caution, there isn't really another place in the lecture to mention this, but you don't want to, we kind of talked about this with compaction too. Oh yeah, continued pressure in the same spots with like a hose, yeah, which is I guess also human, but water can create compaction just with gravity falling on it, you spraying on it all the time. Anyway, what I was going to say is you want to be really careful about cultivating your soil when it's wet, especially a clay soil. And this is again kind of goes back to that soil structure thing. Like you can destroy the soil structure, and that then compacts the clay soil or even the like loamy ones. You know, so just being careful not to be like tilling a lot when it's really wet. You can like, of course, if you're like planting at something and when it right before the rain or right during the rain, that's not going to be a big deal, but you don't want to be working your soil with machinery or like double digging. That's what I'm talking about, not necessarily planting a tree or something like that. I think here we can, let's see what time is it. Let's take a break. Yeah, this is perfect. Let's just say at 6:05, we can take a break, and then we will talk about kind of soil-based problems, potential problems. I can kind of answer these questions too. It looks like Brenda's got it. Yeah, Drew, actually, yeah, rain can compact soil for sure. That's actually a nice reason to have mulch, because it actually protects against rain. So the water is falling and it is considered a way to compact. Granted, when you have a good vegetative cover, you know, of plants, they are breaking that fall. But if you just have like a, you know, dirt lot or something and water's just coming down on it, even if it's a light rain, it's still compacting it. It is falling from, you know, it is gravity. And so, yeah, rain on bare soil is considered compaction. Yeah, I guess that's the best example of a non-human intervention. I'm going to kind of read some of these. Yeah, livestock for sure. Animals, I would consider livestock human intervention because they, but maybe not. Yeah. I wonder if someone removed cement slab to plant it, if that soil would be compacted. Genevieve, are you talking about like underneath the cement slab? Probably, I'm assuming. Usually it's not so bad. It is potentially, but it's actually been, because cement slab, it's actually, oh, I see. Yeah. Generally speaking, it's not so bad under it because you think there's, I don't know what that is, but it's like spreading out the weight. It's not just like, you know, I've broken up concrete and you plant into it, you know, put your mulch and stuff, and the thing's doing fine. It's not that bad. Where I've seen compaction really bad is like, you know, usually cars driving over it or people walking on it. I did a yard where they actually, I think the guy was a carpenter or something, and he had all this carpet that he laid down in the front yard, and it was kind of like a version of AstroTurf. You know, so those carpet that they just walked on, drove on, that was on top of soil. And that was so compacted, even though it kind of spreads out the weight, it's just the weight of that. And yeah, anyway, I don't know why I brought that up, but yeah, compaction generally is just, that's where I've seen it, where it's like something, you know, on top of it that, but concrete generally isn't so bad. It's usually, I mean, it is compacted somewhat, but I've definitely planted into that. Yeah, so yeah, Francis also confirmed, you know, you can plant into removing concrete. Yeah, it's surprisingly not as compact as where people walk and cars drive on. Anyway, 6:05 guys, we got a break. Drink your water, hydrate.
I have a question, if I may.
Yeah.
I am at the community garden in El Sereno that used to be a Caltrans parking lot. We recently had a fruit tree donation that we just planted in different areas of the garden. And that's where I discovered that when we dug the holes for the trees and poured water in them, some of them were more clay based than and others were a little bit more sandy. And also, it's when I saw that there were areas of the place that had dumped like sandy stuff, or because it used to be like a dumpster kind of thing. So when you mention ruining the structure of the soil, like can you give me a little bit more about that? Like if there's all kinds of things on there, how do I work with what I got if I have a hodgepodge of stuff? And what can I do to provide healthier stuff to the soil?
Yeah. We'll talk a little bit about it, but yes, just as a, we'll reiterate it. But yeah, in the urban landscape, we do find a lot of dumping and also fill soil, a mix of like maybe the native soil with whatever fill soil. And if the soil structure, typically, yeah, if there's a lot of dumping, the soil structure has been maybe destroyed a bit. The soil structure is kind of like, it's almost like the cake, when you bake a cake and it's got those like little holes in it, and they're not perfectly all the same size. And it's kind of how all those mineral matter and organic matter and pore space fit together. And they're different little sizes, and you want a really diverse kind of cake crumb, I guess, of your soil. And usually when it's been destroyed, it's like smashed together and it's either all the same size, or it's almost like flour, you just like, it's like a poof, and there's no texture or structure, like literally structure, like when you pick it up, it's just like, dust in your hand or flour or something like that. And I mean, that could also be when it's dry, but either way, soil is very resilient. I've seen really, really, like they said, that carpet one had a lot of dump stuff in it and was terribly, terribly compacted. We had to use like a, basically like those things called a rototiller or whatever to, open up the soil because it's so hard. And with mulch and plants, they kind of do that work. They do that magic together. Roots do that naturally, and when they have a little bit of moisture and that mulch and whatnot, they're actually kind of busting up that soil that's either compacted or at the same time improving that soil structure, because like basically plant roots shed off like little exudates and waste and stuff, and all those like little gluey bits and microbes and stuff create this better kind of structure. So really, I think of the soil structure as being very much part of like the soil biology, so having a living soil. And so having plants there, watering them, or like having plants there, mulch, you're already on your way to kind of like creating that. So it is slow, but it's not going to happen overnight. But plants and soil are very resilient. So they both can bounce back. It's all about, everything's always about just creating the conditions, right, for something to thrive. So definitely, yeah, even if you have like sand in one part and clay in another, all of them are going to benefit from the added soil biology that will come with plants, water, and mulch, essentially. Does that make sense? Yeah, cool. And we'll talk about that again in the class if anyone missed that was on break. We're going to talk about soil food web a little bit. It says my audio is a bit funky today. Weird. Let me try with my headphones. Maybe that will help. Sometimes that works. Does that help anything? So I don't know. We'll see. If it is, I don't know how to fix it, unfortunately. But maybe this helps. Okay. Yeah. Give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down or whatever if the soil. Oh, it's the same? Wait, I don't hear anyone now.
I can hear you, Claire. It sounds a little bit better.
Okay. I don't know what to do about it because nothing obvious is happening, but I'll just keep moving ahead. I guess it sounds a little bit better, so I'll keep moving ahead. Sorry, guys. Okay, so slow infiltration. Maybe I'm talking too loud. I'm just like alone in my house yelling. Anyway, okay, so slow infiltration can be kind of, we're going to talk a little bit about the soil-based problems. So slow infiltration doesn't have to be a soil-based problem. It's more like the wrong plant in the wrong place will spell disaster. So putting the wrong plant in a slow infiltrating soil, that might be a problem. But on its own, slow infiltration doesn't have to be like a bad thing. So yeah, the gardens you maintain might have clay soil, and maybe that wasn't kind of kept in mind when they planted the garden. So that will be when you kind of start to see plant failure and stuff, because there might be a bunch of plants that don't want to be in these slow infiltrating soils, just like not thriving. And that's when you would want to replace those with plants that are adapted to clay soil. And that's where I'd be like, look at your that list that I said, the native plants for heavy soils list. There are plenty of options. I'm not going to go through each of them because there's like over 40 of them. However, there are a few that aren't on there that I just want to add now. And you guys can maybe write them in or just add to them, but they're really beautiful options. So I wanted to add them. For example, there's Butylon palmeri, the Indian mallow, that one does well in clay. There's also Carex spissa, which is a grass, San Diego sedge, I believe. That one does pretty good in clay. The Erigeron glaucus, Wayne Roderick, that is the seaside daisy that was in our plant ID class last week with the little pink daisy that kind of grows like a little shrub, little perennial, not shrub, sorry, a small little perennial. That's the Erigeron glaucus, that's good for clay. Also, I have Tecate cypress, the Hesperocyperus forbaceae, and the Douglas iris, the Iris douglasiana. Those two work in clay soil. And then two salvias you gotta know, the Salvia apiana, white sage, and hummingbird sage, Salvia spithaceae. Those two also work in clay soil. So add those to the list that you have. And again, there's plenty on there. Just as a note, though they may thrive in clay soil, that doesn't mean they're still sensitive to overwatering. So many of these are still going to be sensitive to being overwatered, not necessarily, even though they thrive in clay soil. Most plants, well, I don't want to, maybe not most plants, but just because you can thrive in clay soil doesn't mean that you like want to be in wet soil all the time. Pathogenic activity. This can be a soil-based issue. I'll talk a little bit about soil food web. This is a huge topic that you could go like totally down the rabbit hole with. This is gonna be its own course for sure, but I will try to present it in a nutshell. But essentially soil pathogens are microorganisms that cause plant disease by the way of the soil. They invade the plant by way of the soil. And that's usually like a spore, cell, fungal hyphae, something like that. And pathogens exist naturally in the soil. That you're not going to eradicate your soil of pathogens. It's an ecosystem. So here you have the soil food web. Pathogens are just part of that ecosystem. What you want is, a balanced kind of so you want like a healthy, balanced community where the kind of beneficial microbes keep the pathogens in check. So it's like your gut health. You have E. coli in there naturally, but it gets kept in check by a nice, diverse community of microbes in your gut. And when those E. coli get out of control or out of, if you eat something that's bad or your immune system's off, that's when you're going to see an effect or an issue. But if you have a healthy community, a diverse community, they're pretty much kept in check. So that's the same thing with your soil. And you kind of think of your soil as like its own ecosystem in the soil, and that's like the soil food web. And I guess, yeah, also the soil organic matter, that little sliver of the pie chart we talked about, that's where this is all happening essentially. That's the living kind of portion of the soil. And that's because it kind of feeds a lot of different community organisms. So here on the bottom here, you have the organic matter, which is like, yeah, the waste and residue, all the little bits living and dead. And those get eaten by bacteria or fungi or nematodes, and those nematodes get eaten out, and you know, all this goes so forth and so on, right? It's just a big kind of, it's a relationship among a wide range of living kind of organisms in the soil. And that is what's keeping it healthy, having a nice diverse community. So it's just, they're just cycling nutrients by like, basically like eating and shitting each other out, you know? So it's just this, you know, very diverse community is what you're going for with the soil food web. So yeah, what did I want to say about, let me make sure. Yeah, so with soil pathogens, typically they are root rots or something like that, or like a vascular wilt, and they are going to affect that below ground tissue and invade the plant roots. Something like, for example, Phytophthora is a fungal pathogen that actually thrives in really wet conditions. So again, you want to create conditions where you have a healthy soil, but if you have conditions that where the pathogens thrive, like something like Phytophthora, you're actually really wet conditions or saturated roots lead to them producing more spores, and they can invade the plant roots without a wound. There doesn't need to be like a wounded plant stem or plant root. It just invades through the fact that there is just saturation around the root system. So you know, even in as little as like 4 to 8 hours, they can kind of like, meaning 4 to 8 hours of like full saturation. So again, it's about avoiding, I guess, the conditions that create the kind of pathogenic activity. And usually with our native plants, it's like these super wet, kind of saturated soils. I'm not talking right after you water. I'm saying like it's saturated for hours, you know, at a time, maybe like 8 hours or something. That's when you're kind of creating potentially pathogenic conditions. So like I said, you want to kind of try to recreate, oh, no, I didn't say this. The relationship, like so going back to the plant community thing that I talked about with the plant ID class, the last class, different plant communities have different kind of leaf litters, which affects the organic matter that's breaking down in the soil too, right? So that's going to affect their soil food web. So essentially like a oak woodland or riparian habitat, it's going to have a lot more leaf drop and litter than maybe like a desert plant community, right? And thinking about that in terms of the soil community and trying to kind of recreate that for whatever plant community you're trying to recreate, or sorry, develop in the garden, that can also be really helpful, because leaf litter, you know, a good amount of leaf litter is going to, for a oak woodland, is going to be what it prefers over like desert DG or something like that. So that's just kind of an important way to tie in the plant community thing, I guess. Let's see, the relationship. Yeah. So we want this kind of natural cycling of nutrients as best as can, trying to mimic the plant community's natural cycling of nutrients. Let's see, I think, oh, here it says tilling breaks up the soil food web. So I kind of mentioned that in the break, and but yeah, the more you till, the more you're actually breaking up the soil food web or soil structure. It's kind of all the same. The more alive your soil is, the more rich in biology and microbial life, usually the better structure it has. So they're all kind of linked together, and the more you till it, you're busting up all these you know, these organisms' homes and connections and stuff. So you actually kind of destroy the soil food web, which means you're kind of the equivalent of like, you know, knocking down your immune system. You know, you're really potentially starting to create conditions where pathogens thrive. And then it says feed the soil to feed the soil food web to feed the plants. I didn't put that, but yes, that's true. Like essentially you're feeding the soil, and that's what feeds the organisms in the soil food web, the microbes and everything. And then that's what the plants thrive on. So having healthy soils is like having healthy plants. It's not just the plants. You really want to think about what's happening underground. Next is salts can be an issue.
So some plants can stand a little bit more salt than others, especially ones that live on the coast naturally. But there can be issues with salt with like irrigation or inland gardens, especially if you are irrigating inland, like a hot area, and maybe like a single application is not a big deal. But if you're doing like repeated applications of like really short kind of intervals of irrigation that only reach kind of shallowly, and you're inland and it's pretty warm, you are you're risking this accumulation of evaporating salts. I hope that makes sense. But essentially, if you're just if you're just watering very shallowly, you're just not really getting it deep enough, the water, and so whatever minerals exist in it, especially in our our municipal water and stuff that typically has more minerals than rainwater or something, those are going to start to evaporate up. So that is also a reason to always water deeply. Though we'll water infrequently, but you're going to be wanting to water deeply, which we will get into in the irrigation class. But that is the goal. You're not trying to do little shallow waterings because the roots are down below, and also you don't want to get this kind of salt accumulation potentially. Also, fertilizers and compost can increase salt levels, with excessive use, or even really high fertilizers. High nutrient fertilizers can have quite a bit of salts in them. And especially, again, in the dry environments because of this evaporative factor. So, also salts can build up in containers, especially, or like small planting beds, especially ones that are kind of hemmed in by like buildings or like cinder block, kind of that sort of thing. Like just the urban landscape can kind of leach out salts and things like that. Typically, the winter rains, if we get a good one, that washes it out, this accumulated salt. So it shouldn't be a problem if you're getting, I guess, you just don't want to add to it, I suppose. So maybe just like avoiding fertilizers when they're not necessary and not doing the shallow waterings. Otherwise, the kind of natural salt accumulation should be able to be drenched out with the rain. Okay, compaction can be a big issue, obviously. Some compacted soils are clay, but not all of them are. And sometimes when we say, you can compact any kind of soil, but clays typically get compacted more easily. But loams can too, and sandy soils can as well. But sometimes we use the word compacted when the soil is actually hydrophobic, and that's when it's dried to a point where it's very difficult for it to easily absorb new moisture, and that would be a hydrophobic soil. You can also have compacted and hydrophobic soil, so you could have both, but sometimes it's just hydrophobic and maybe not compacted, but they behave similarly. And really the only way to decompact soils is really through plants and organic matter. So that's what I was saying in the break, is the plants are going to do that work for you, not just by their roots, but their interaction, their kind of like interface with the soil, all that microbial activity that happens around the roots, because there's a lot of nutrient exchange and exudates and things being released. That is going to do the kind of decompaction work. And on the right here, these are not native grasses. Well, they're not native to California, but we do have our own panicum, the one in the middle. We have one in that genus, and generally speaking, bunch grasses in general have really deep, dense, hairy kind of root systems, which is great for decompacting soil. And you can see something like a turf grass on the very left. Their roots don't go very deep, so they're really not doing much to decompact soil. They're very shallow, less than a foot in terms of how far their roots go, whereas those bunch grasses are really going to go deep and break up the soil. So if you have a lot of compaction, maybe considering like even like a meadow, considering installing a meadow would be a good strategy to decompact. That's it for compaction. Okay, managing soils. So we're going to talk a little bit about managing soils with mulch. Let me make sure. Okay, mulch is just the mulch is just basically anything you lay on top of the bare soil. It's top dressing.
Claire,
Yeah,
the sound is still pretty bad. Is there?
really? I guess I could sign out and try to sign in again.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't want it to be, yeah, I guess, does that make sense? I guess I'll try to leave and re-enter. Stop my share.
I'll stay in, Claire. My internet is going in and out, but I think I can handle it.
Okay, yeah, I'll come, I'm just gonna come right back, hopefully. it changes something. Emerson said he can hear it perfect, but it sounds like a couple people can't hear it very well. Leave and come back, so somebody let me in.
Okay. While we're waiting for Claire, let's play Ink Pink. You guys remember how to play that? That's, if I say something like, bankrupt Quercus, the answer is broke oak. So the one I'm thinking of is, it doesn't matter, sugar bush. Or no worries, sugar bush. No one? You guys have to guess, at least one guess.
Mary Berry? Mary.
Oh, okay. Okay. Close.
Is my sound any better or is it busted? Same?
It sounds pretty clear to me, Claire.
Anyone want to chime in the chat or chime in? And sounds like some people can hear it, some people can't. Sounds like I'm partially submerged underwater. Yeah, I don't know what to do about that, guys. I guess is it better if I like I'm louder?
Yes.
Okay, I can kind of yell out this if you want. Okay, I'll just speak louder. I am alone in my house, so it's fine.
Okay. Okay. So we were playing
oh yeah,
Ink Pink, and the question was, it means no worries, sugar bush.
no worries, sugar bush.
It means no worries, sugar bush.
No.
Hakuna Matata Rus Ovada. Everyone should have gotten that. It was
That's a good one.
obvious.
That's a good one. For sure.
I don't even know what the second word you said is. The only thing I got was Hakuna Matata. What's the other word you said?
Rus Ovada is the scientific name for, or the botanical name for sugar bush. Or is it lemonade berry? It's one of those.
No, it is. You're right. Sugar bush.
Yeah.
Rus Ovada. Yeah.
Yeah, the other one is Rus ilicifolia?
Integrifolia.
Integrifolia.
Yeah.
I'm never going to use that ever, so
Right.
whatever.
A lemonade berry, obviously.
Yeah, exactly.
Much easier.
Hakuna Matata Rus Ovada.
That's good. I like that. I'm so bad at those. Okay, well, I'll talk about mulch. I'll try to yell it. I hope for those of you who can hear me, I'm sorry, I'll be yelling at you. But let's hope for the best. So mulch is, like I said, any kind of top dressing. It's just what's on top of the soil. It's different from compost, even though many people use them interchangeably. Compost is actually something that's already been decomposed, and mulch has not yet started that decomposition process. And the LEDWP wanted us to mention that if you are applying for that rebate, the turf replacement rebate program, it's required that you have 3 inches of organic mulch, which is the wooded shreddy, not rocks exactly. So I'm going to talk about all of those, but why use mulch? Before I get into the types of mulch, so mulch essentially reduces soil water loss, conserves moisture. It can suppress the weeds, obviously, because it's kind of suffocating them. They can't break through it. It also protects against, like extreme environmental conditions like temperature, even with snow, if you're in an area that gets snow. it can buffer against that. And or heat, more commonly would be heat or wind, and it helps buffer against those extremes. Here it's well, basically mulch also feeds the soil biology, so it kind of slowly breaks down and decomposes, and that's what adds biology to your soil. And that like I said, the soil food web eats all those little things and creates the soil food web that we want, and it creates that kind of healthy living soil. And that's what this means with this kind of statement here, altering the chemical and biological composition to some degree. It's just kind of slowly adding life to the soil is how I would rephrase that, I suppose. The next three are all kind of aesthetic reasons to have mulch, obviously, like indicating a pathway or a focus point, or just kind of trying to delineate like a room, you know, a specific functional area or something, or just giving it a kind of finished appearance, you know. Mulch is, well, we're getting there. Let's see, mulching trees and shrubs can recreate some aspects of forest living soil. Yeah, this is kind of going back to that point that different plant communities have different leaf litters, so you can recreate, you want to recreate that as much as you can. So a tree that's from a forested area, mulch can really help recreate that environment. And even if you're in a kind of sun-baked, very exposed area, you can kind of potentially recreate one of these plant communities, essentially, or at least the plant communities, leaf litter or mulch type. So, yeah, did I say anything about that based on, yeah, so the mulches are kind of, you choose the appropriate mulch for the appropriate plant habitat or the plant community comes from. You know, so desert ones are typically like kind of less leaf litter and more DG, more kind of rock gravelly thing. And the oak woodlands, riparians, maybe a little bit of chaparral, but not so much. Maybe can handle a little bit more leaf litter and that shredded oak or wooded mulch type thing. Types of mulch, I'm going to get into each of these specifically, but there's kind of organic and inorganic. And organic is like, formally alive, or also organic mulches are going to break down like in our lifetime. They'll break down slowly and turn into humus or whatever, soil, and the inorganic mulches are not going to break down in our lifetime. They weren't alive. Though I don't know, I feel like rocks are kind of alive, like the hippie inside of me, it's like, yes. But anyway, like they weren't going to break down any further. They're just going to maybe become a smaller rock, but they're not going to break down in terms of decomposition. And yeah, that's inorganic mulches. Here's the list. We'll go through each of them. I believe, yeah, tree barks, shredded wood mulch material. That is. They're usually, this is what people typically think of with mulch. They think like, oh, that's shredded mulch, the shredded wood mulch. And, but obviously you can have many. This is clearly an organic mulch. It came from a tree or came from some sorts of vegetation. Typically you want to have material that is different sizes, like shredded mulch is great because it has different sized pieces because those different size pieces break down at different rates, so the plants have access to those nutrients at different times, and breaks down over time. Also, they kind of weave together better and stay put. The larger bark mulches or like big pieces, they take a lot longer to break down, so the plants might be waiting a while before they start to break down. Also, they're bigger, and what was I going to say about that? Take a long time to decompose. Oh yeah, one thing is that wood chips that you, like maybe if you use like chip drop or something, or a tree trimmer service, that is definitely an organic mulch. Just want to be careful because it's so recently alive that they typically have a lot of nitrogen in them, and they are pretty steamy. They're pretty hot. That nitrogen is hot, and so you want to give it time to dry out and lose some of that. So before you plant your plants, you don't want to be mounding up a bunch of hot mulch around your plants because you kind of steam the area, and that would be creating conditions. inappropriate conditions for native plants, right? So just being cognizant of those tree trimmers. They're a great resource because they're free. Just maybe timing, logistics. Make sure to plan some time for it to rest in place. Yes, no gorilla mulch in fire-prone areas. It can, it's like kind of like hay, it just burns up. Tree bark or equivalent shredded wood-based material. Yeah, so this type of mulch is what is required for the LADWP turf rebate program. The rest of them don't count for as mulch for them. Decomposed granite is a mulch great for drought tolerant or our native or deserts. Those type of communities, plant communities, native plants from drought tolerant areas or deserts, they're gonna like this decomposed granite. It does, you wanna lay it down 2 to 3 inches like the other mulch, or like this, they're all mulches. And it can help retain moisture somewhat, but by nature of it being, like a sandier thing, it is gonna drain more quickly, obviously, but then the kind of more, the organic mulch, right? Also very useful for that fire-wise zone of your house, so that's 0 to 5 feet around your home. This is great as a non-flammable mulch. And it does, yes, it does count as a hardscape potentially, or yeah, we'll get into the next, the 5th class, the rebate we'll talk a lot about. Gravel mulch, so rocks and gravel. Again, this would be considered hardscape for the rebate, so it's kind of not considered mulch for them, but it is useful for desert gardens. And rocks in general, rocks are pretty expensive. They are they're heavy, they're expensive. So definitely make sure to consider them if somebody wants rocks, because they are usually like a very expensive part of it, because there's especially big ones. But anyway, if you have the budget and you're using rocks, start with the larger ones. It's kind of more designed, but to start with the large rocks, then cobbles, and then your like smaller gravels. It kind of has a more natural look, and you can fill in the smaller gravel into the space, so kind of start big ones, next medium size, and work your way down. And that's just so it looks natural. It's absolutely necessary. If you only have the budget for one type of rock, then that's also it. Leaf litter. Leaf litter is great. It's kind of like your natural, any kind of natural leaf drop, pine needles, oak leaves. These are great. You want to keep these, especially if you have oaks like PSA. Don't remove the leaves. This is really a key part of the, like I was saying, the soil food web. This is like a healthy oak wants to have its nice bedding of leaf litter. But leaf litter in general is great. If you can, leaving it there is best if you can, if the client is fine with that, if it makes sense, because it is basically a natural free mulch that is going to break down, contribute to soil biology, and add carbon to the soil. They all are, anytime the soil biology is basically breaking that stuff down and turning it into carbon. Yeah, it's a natural mulch. You just want to, like any mulch, you just be careful about not letting it pile too high up around the crown or like the neck of the plant. That might encourage like a root rot, or encourage crown rot. But that's the case with pretty much any of the mulches. Maybe just pull it away. But like the sage here on the right, like those leaves came from that plant, same nutrients. Just encourage that nutrient cycling, that natural nutrient cycling. Organic recycling of yard waste. Okay, so this could be grasses, weedy stuff, whatever you're picking out of your yard, hay, straw, it says too. You want to be careful of anything that is weedy, that has weeds on it, maybe like something you clipped back. This is just, you're just basically reseeding weeds in your yard if you just throw them down as mulch. You really preferably want to compost these before you apply them. Something like straw, though, typically doesn't have weed seed on it, but straw breaks down really quickly. So you would need to reapply. The plants will not get up to size before it breaks down. Wait, I lost my train. Anyway, the straw will break down more quickly than the plants grow out and cover the soil. So if you are using something like straw, it breaks down very quickly. Also, it kind of blows around and stuff, but if it's free and that's what you got, I get it. Shredded, so cardboards, newspapers, these are totally doable. They work. You probably don't want to just use it as just the only mulch, you know, the only top dressing. This is typically something you would use as like a sheet mulching or like that lasagna style mulching. You put the newspaper, cardboard, construction paper down, and then like a 3-inch layer of what's it called? Mulch, the organic mulch, the wooded shredded mulch on top. And that's what they encourage you to do. I think actually LADWP encourages this if you want to remove your lawn and you don't want to remove it physically. This is an option to doing it, is the lasagna style or sheet mulching approach. Petrochemical products. This is like that, like Nike Turf, you know, the kind of plastic mulch, rubber bark kind of thing. These are not recommended at all. This is an inorganic mulch like the rocks. It's not going to break down. And in this case, it's just going to break down into like microplastics, which is like arguably worse. But anyway, these don't encourage that. They're not adding to the soil biology. They're just kind of plastic that's sitting on top of your soil. So these ones we don't want. They basically, yeah, these aren't adding anything to the soil. How much mulch? Mulch, you want a 3-inch layer. You definitely need to do 3 inches for the rebate program. Be sure not to pile too much against the trunks or stems, as I said, or the plants will have crown rot or something like that. So you don't want to add too much, sorry, lost my train of thought. Yeah, you just don't want to add too much around the stem of the plant. Wait, I think I have some more notes. Yeah, so again, the mulch is just promoting the natural cycling. It's very, do I have anything? Oh, I was gonna say, you don't want to use those plastic or weed cloths. You don't need those. First of all, the plastic kind of suffocates the soil biology. You really want to have that interface between the soil and the organic mulch is where like the soil biology, everything breaks down. So that is actually what we want to encourage, this natural cycling of nutrients. And the weed cloths inhibit it. And they actually cause quite a bit of compaction too. They like stretch out and, but mostly they kind of suffocate that soil biology, like create more heat or compact it. So they aren't ideal and they shouldn't be necessary. Ideally, you are weeding in those first 2 to 3 years and before the plant is fully established, and that would be your kind of weeding program. And ideally after that, there'd be enough coverage to where the plants don't you won't have weed issues or weed cloth issue. Drew, you have your hand raised. You want to unmute yourself? Oh, you have a question? Is it the same as it's in the chat?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure. It sounded like a good time to go over that, just because you were talking about how inorganic weed cloths can result in like suffocation of the soil. I've been a part of sheet mulching jobs where we've used very thick cardboard, and I couldn't help leaving the job being like, that soil is not going to get wet for the next 1.5 years. And so I know, projects with a little bit of a higher budget will use kind of like, I don't really know what type of, it's like a heavier duty paper cardboard that
like the construction paper, I think is like painters take. You
have to buy that from a box store, and it probably costs a good deal of money. And I know that I've just gleaned, liquor store like cardboard and stuff, but a lot of it seems too thick. What's your experience with
I think the best case scenario with those, and when I've seen it break down even the thick stuff really well and kind of stick to it, is not on slopes, because a lot of time that thick cardboard on a slope with the mulch kind of moves around, and that can be an issue of keeping it at the 3 inches. But aside from that, what I've seen be really successful is like before a good rainy year. Like, I mean, obviously we don't always have those, but a good watering can really, really help. So if someone is on sprinklers and they kind of got that really wet, that can really help. But I know that I did a couple yards in the 2018 year, which had a lot of rain, or good amount of rain, right? Yeah, that was 2018. And we put down a lot of cardboard, thick, and similarly, it feels like too much, but almost all of it broke down within the year. Some of it had little bits and pieces, but that's what I typically see is it's really about the water helping break it down. So sometimes just waiting for the rainy season is enough, because you are going to be watering around the plants and they'll be getting their water, you know, around where the plants are. And we'll talk about it with irrigation, like how much you water around. But yeah, that is definitely a concern, but doing it, you know, if you do have the option, doing it in the fall, I think is really helpful, because yeah, all summer long, it just kind of stays dry and not a lot's happening. Some people actually, well, that's watering before, but it doesn't always kind of, you know, if you have like a lawn, you know, and you put the cardboard on top, it doesn't always kind of get through. But what I have seen is yeah, the thicker cardboard works best with a good rain year or good watering to break down. And if I'm not anticipating that, yeah, sometimes just like the paper, or, you know, maybe like you ripping the cardboard in half, not in half, but, you know, you can separate it. Sometimes I do that if it's like, it's not looking like it's going to be, but that is a really good point. It's not foolproof, but it is a great cheap option. So that is a very good point. But it does break down eventually. So it could just be like the next good rainy year, whenever that is, will break it down. But I understand that, like, you know, it's not necessarily going to break down immediately if it is a year like this year's rain, essentially. Not sure if I answered that, but I don't always have the answers. Let's see. Oh, lastly, I think I've already kind of said this, but with the mulch, the organic mulch is the nitrogen that is necessary for plant growth, you know, is kind of inherent in the organic mulches, as like I said, as they break down, whereas the rock mulches aren't really going to add little, you know, any nutrients, because they're not breaking down and adding to the soil biology. However, if you're using them with the appropriate plant community, like a desert community, those plants are adapted to very low fertility needs. So they're happy with that. So it's just something to kind of keep in mind about the mulch. Mulch is like the slow release fertility program, like the natural one. Amendments. Okay, so yeah, so healthy soils, we've talked about this. If you have a healthy soil food web, you don't really need to add additional fertility. Traditionally, again, the plants are adapted to they're adapted to these lower fertility soils. And if you're matching and recreating the correct plant community kind of leaf litter, that should be enough. You can, if you're adding too much fertility, you actually can encourage weeds, because you're basically creating a niche, like a new, all this fertility, and nature like abhors a void. So if there's a bunch of one thing, she's gonna, you know, fill it with something. So like weeds or something. So just, you know, being careful about amendments. I don't want to say, well, it does say here, just say no, but there is an argument for compost in certain situations, but I guess it's more like, don't compost too frequently, or maybe like too aggressively. You know, you really don't need compost like you do with a vegetable garden, where it's like hard to over compost in a vegetable garden. With natives, they really don't need that much fertility. Maybe in a situation where the soil is so like awful and maybe like completely compacted, or it's like crazy fill soil or something like that, I might think about doing like a top dressing of compost for the, you know, after planting. But like I said, most situations I don't use it, but there is a case to be made for it. Also, containers, you know, container gardening could definitely, it's not, containers aren't, they're kind of an artificial soil. So you do kind of need to feed them. And in that situation, I could see compost being used in native plants. Again, not very aggressively, but, you know, if they need a little boost of food because they don't have this like extensive soil food web, then I could totally make an argument for compost. But typically those synthetic high NPK fertilizers, like not necessary. But I'm sure you can make an argument for things. Let's see, healthy soils. Oh, and also like, this is like zooming out, but like our impact on the small scale has a, you know, what we do on the small scale has an impact, a larger impact. So it's like, if you're putting those, especially those highly synthetic fertilizers, typically people over apply them, and especially with native plants, they're not going to uptake all that nutrient. So you're actually just leading to runoff. It's going to get in our waterways and infect our oceans and all the things. So just also that's another reason to kind of avoid the amendments, or at least the synthetic ones if you can. Changing the soil texture. As like this is like, I suppose it's, I already said this in the soil texture triangle. It's very tempting to want to change your soil texture. It's labor intensive and costly, like I said, and dangerous at worst, you know, because it's just, you're going to destroy the soil structure, and that's a bad idea. But even the act of tilling and stuff, maybe you're like, oh, I can fluff up the soils and create more pore space, which people do in farming frequently, but it's just going to create these larger pores temporarily, and then it settles again. So instead of trying to till the soil, which typically destroys your soil structure, you would prefer to just pick the plant species that's appropriate for the soil type. So again, back to the same refrain, which is pick the right plant for the right place. And so don't go trying to change your soil texture, just try to pick the right plant. This one, does anyone want to, I mean, this is like plant ID. Anyone know what the purple pink flower is in the front, you know, along the pathway? This is kind of, should be easy, good practice. Throw it in the chat, shout it out, unmute yourself, whatever. Anyone know? We did cover it in plant ID. Yeah, so Penstemon heterophyllus is probably Margarita Bob. Thank you, Drew. Yeah, that one. What about the, that like, I think you guys can see my cursor, that like the stalk here in the background, these like magenta, tall flowering stalks. Who knows what that is? It wasn't the, there wasn't a picture of it, but I did mention it. Anyone familiar with this one? It's great, smells fragrant AF. It's lovely.
Maybe it's yeah, hummingbird sage.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. I'm getting somewhere, I promise, with this. Yes, that's hummingbird sage, Salvia staphysaceae. Thank you, Jill. And then what about, actually, this one was definitely bottom corner here. It's got like a pink little daisy-like flower on it. It's a little perennial. Anyone know what that one is? That was definitely in the plant ID lecture. Somebody shout it out. Seaside daisy, yes, thank you. So Erigeron glauca, that one. And then lastly, that big one in the background with the, everyone knows what that one is, I'm imagining, with the white flower. What was it? Say it again, Dolly.
Well, it wasn't Matissa.
Yes, yeah, Matilla poppy, or Matalia poppy. Cowboy fried egg poppy. So I'm just forcing you guys to all name these plants, because all of these thrive in clay. So you don't have to sacrifice like, you know, the beauty and aesthetics of the garden just because you have a clay or slow draining soil. All of these definitely do well in clay soils. Again, they are sensitive to overwatering, but they all can thrive in it. So it's just a good example of clay soils aren't like a, you know, I want to say death sentence, but that's not what I'm going for, you know, too grim, but they don't have to be like a terrible thing. I don't actually have a problem with clay soils, but I hear people talk about them poorly. So feel this need to give them a good name. Anyway, lastly, so that slide was just opportunities for kind of professional consulting and extras. These are things that you could just charge extra for if you do have a maintenance business that you have. This is kind of like extras that you could potentially offer clients. Things like soil analysis, that could be anything from like the simple settling test to you know, testing, like a professional lab testing for, like, you know, heavy metals and things like that. Wallace Labs is a good one for SoCal. And you can also perform like an infiltration test, soil type, figure that out, give like your general kind of grade of the soil. This is typically something I would just kind of include in like a preliminary consultation, but it is something you can offer, you know, giving them yeah, giving them a like a soil analysis, whatever that may be. That could be yeah, very bigger to smaller, whatever that means to you. Planned replacement program for mulch. This could just be a gig. In fact, I think last class somebody talked about this just being their full-time kind of regular income job, going around and essentially replenishing mulch in young gardens. So as we said, the older gardens typically don't need replenishing of mulch because they have coverage and probably their own leaf litter dropping. But on a younger garden, or maybe someone didn't put enough mulch in the first time, it's only an inch, or there's erosion or something, you know, is the making the mulch disappear, and that you would just charge the associated fees for like the materials, delivery, the labor to spread it out. And that can just be an extra kind of source of income, or an extra you charge on top of your regular services. BMP stands for Best Management Practices for Soil Health. So I typically don't see this very often with like a homeowner, like a small scale thing, but this might be something like testing the soil in multiple locations before and after installation, or even over time, and testing for microbial activity, compaction, infiltration rates. And you could kind of create a report to the client that then you can refer back to at a later time after you've been implementing your best management practices. So all of the things we talk about in this class, and have kind of like proof, or at least a report showing that things have improved over time. And like I said, I don't think most your average homeowner cares about this or wants this, but I have used this type of thing more like on a much larger scale for something like a ranch or something. I've definitely worked with ranches, and usually actually in a more agricultural setting, but we kind of create like a survey that we that several of the workers go over and like to assess different kind of factors that indicate soil health, so microbial activity, compaction, and then we take the survey at one point, do the different, we take the survey at different intervals of time, and then you can kind of show the improvements with, by either showing the results of the survey or whatever. Like I said, I don't typically see this asked for as a service, but in a large scale, and maybe someone would ask for it. We've come to an end, and now we're on homework. The homework this week is, like I was saying, you're going to do the infiltration rate test and the soil texture by feel test. So take a shovel to a work site, dig a pot-sized hole, like the 1 gallon, and then you'll use that flow chart that you have to figure out the texture by feel. The ribbon test is part of that, and then you'll note the soil type that you get from the texture by feel test, and then do the infiltration, or do it at the same time, whatever. Fill the hole with water, make the measurements over time, figure out what kind of soil type you have via the infiltration test, and compare. Like, did you get the same results? Did you not? It says to bring photos of the hole full and empty, and as well as notes to the next class, but hopefully we will be able to do a breakout room next class. We're going to work on that. But otherwise, you can send it to me on my email. But I want to see what the results were from each test, and do they correspond? Did you get the same thing? Were they both, does it make sense? Was it fast infiltrating and a sandy soil, or does it not make sense because it's fast infiltrating, but it was a really high clay soil, something like that, just working through it. I want to see that more than, I want to see you guys, I want to see your brains work.
Claire, before we leave, there was one question that I sent you in the direct messages about how to clean soil.
Is there a way to rebuild the soil for use after chemical application from grass removal? Yeah, I've heard lots of different, typically because I've actually heard the argument that to use chemical removal, of your grass, and essentially kind of thinking of it like antibiotics. So maybe you take antibiotics, it kills all the good and bad, because it's going to kill some of your soil life, the soil biology, because it is chemicals. But ideally, if it's like antibiotics, you think like, okay, now what do I have to do to get my gut biome back in order? So like taking your probiotics, eating healthy, eating like good whole foods and things like that. That's kind of the same thing here. So like I said earlier, soil is very resilient. So if you do the chemical application, it's basically the recommended thing is to do essentially, try to rebuild the soil food web, which would be with plants and the mulch. So essentially, and then over time, they actually do break it down. I have seen also some people do, you could do like spray compost tea, like an aerated compost tea on the soil before applying the mulch or at the time of installation of the plants. That also can add a little bit more soil biology. It's kind of like a kickstart, but you do have to make sure that composted tea is good quality and typically aerated. But yeah, that's another option. That's a great point. But if it's one-time chemical application to get rid of the grass, I understand. It's not my favorite, but I do understand that. And I think the goal moving forward is to like really put your effort towards improving the soil biology to break down those chemicals that exist, because they can over time. Like I said, any kind of a diverse, healthy soil ecosystem can pretty much keep everything at bay, or work with whatever's there. Any other questions? Oh, I see Miguel has, are there any specific native plants that remediate contaminated soil? I think most of the time I've heard with contaminated soils, it's people use mushrooms, but I have heard some things about bunch grasses. Again, those like, their soil, sorry, I can't think, their root systems kind of uptake quite a bit of nutrients, and they just kind of hold it in place. So a lot of times with contaminated soils, you're just getting other plants or mushrooms to uptake those things, and then you either toss them or just leave it and don't eat it type of thing. So I've heard that. If anyone else has any tips on that, please feel free to unmute yourself or put it in the chat. Those are the two things I've heard. Any other questions? We're wrapping up, guys. So we're done. But if anyone has any questions to throw in there, I will yell my response. Cool. Well, I'm here until this thing. Oh, do you recommend any wetting agent for hydrophobic soils? I don't recommend, no, typically you could do a slow, like if you're irrigating, kind of do it in intervals, like in pulses, water a little bit until it absorbs. And once it gets to starts running off, stop, kind of do like short intervals of watering so that it kind of slowly seeps in. That's kind of the best case scenario. Yeah, gypsum is also an option, but I don't typically see it. Well, actually, just in my experience, I'm not sure. I haven't seen it do like immediately kind of help with hydrophobic soils. I typically like to do the kind of slow wetting thing if you need to. And then again, plants are going to really improve that and increasing the soil biology with plants and whatnot. Agar, oh, I've never tried or know that one, but that kind of makes sense. Sorry, I don't have more insight on that one, Francis. Anyone else? Feel free to sign off. We are done for the day. I will see you. I will see you at next class is just irrigation. I believe this weekend is the irrigation workshop, correct?